Minna Schmidt, and I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the Buck Institute. So today I will talk a little bit about the Buck Institute, why I started my work there, and a little bit about my work. So I know that many of you have heard about the Buck. Um, so I'll start with myself first. Uh, and um, so, so I work in Dr. Julie Anderson and Dr. Gordon Lithgow labs. Um, One second. A little bit with myself, why I came to the Buck Institute. This is my entire schooling. I went to Brandeis Hillel, which had a sister school in Marin, at least at the time when I was there, K through 8, where I got a really wonderful education that allowed me to then go on to Lowell High School, where I also got a very good education that prepared me for majoring in chemical biology at Brandeis University. I moved on to the University of California, Santa Cruz for my master's in chemistry. And it was between Brandeis and UCSC when I found out that my family member was diagnosed with Parkinson's. And at the time, my mom, who's right there, said, "Why don't you try to do something about it? You're going in to study research in chemistry. Why don't you try to um, find a cure, basically?" But as I started doing more and more chemistry at UCSC, I found that there were many unanswered questions in biology. There were many things that we still didn't know about Parkinson's. So I left the program and went to the Buck as a volunteer. I avoided biology for a very long time when I was at Brandeis and started as a volunteer to gain ground and to understand what biology and biology of aging is. That was in Dr. Julie Anderson's lab. And I came into the Buck with the goal of pursuing my PhD. Julie said, "Great, we have this biology of aging PhD with USC and the Buck." I was accepted after a year and graduated in 2021. So I came to the Buck with these questions. What is Parkinson's disease? There's still a lot that we don't know. If we knew what Parkinson's was, we would already be able to have something that cures it. How can we alleviate Parkinson's? And can we learn from the perspective of those who have PD? Can we take their symptoms? Can we ask questions about them? Can we translate it into actual experiments in the lab? So these are the goals, these are the questions that are running through my head and Julie's head constantly. So now I'll come back, and I know many of you do know about the Buck, but I want to talk a little bit about what the Buck does and how it approaches the study of Parkinson's, other neurodegenerative diseases, and other diseases of aging. So we'll start.
Chronic disease is the great health challenge of our time. Aging is the main driver of chronic disease. To eliminate chronic disease, we must harness the biology of aging so we can live healthy longer. The Buck Institute is the world's first research organization dedicated solely to the biology of aging. We work with the building blocks of biology to understand how we age.
The Buck is concentrating on really trying to go to the root of the problem, so understanding that we can sort of intervene really early.
The Buck Institute is probably the best place in the world to be working on aging because there's so many different aspects of aging that are being studied. It's key because no one lab can do it all.
Our scientific explorers are brilliant, curious, and committed.
The idea that you could actually develop drugs that slow down the aging process was really something that 20 or 30 years ago people thought this cannot be done. Not only can it be done, but we will do it.
The pieces are in place. And we are in a unique position to put them together. Our world is defined by paradigm shifts, created by scientific discoveries. The biology of aging is the next frontier.
What we've discovered is that the mechanisms of aging themselves are intimately related to the mechanisms of human disease. If we can eradicate the aging component to disease, we're all going to live healthier and longer.
It's just an incredible vision that really will, surpass anything else that we've ever seen before.
We are inviting you to a future of aging without illness. It's happening today, and it's happening here. Join us.
I'm Chris Rebelo. I'm the Senior Director of Communications here at the Buck Institute. It is my extreme pleasure to welcome you to...
We should... That is Chris Rebelo, and she's in charge of communications at the Buck, and she's wonderful. For us as scientists, she does a lot by sending us almost minute updates on the latest research to make sure that we're all up to date. But she also does a lot of about sharing the vision of the Buck with the rest of the community. All right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So, so that was the Buck. And just a disclaimer, the information that we discussed today, while probably very relevant, but you do want to make sure before making any changes in your own lifestyle that you consult your primary care physician, that this is not medical advice, but hopefully one day it will be. We'll see. So a little bit more about the Buck. So the Buck is the first independent biomedical research institute in the world that is focused only on aging. So this is important because a lot of these diseases shown here, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, cancer, arthritis, macular degeneration, frailty in general, type 2 diabetes, osteoporosis, heart disease, as examples, haven't always been looked at in the context of age. They've been looked at very specific mechanisms, specific chemicals, targets, but not in the context of aging. And it's very important to look in the context of aging because they occur mainly with age. So the mission of the Buck is to end the threat of age-related disease for this and future generations. So at the Buck, this is the birthplace of geroscience, which according to the NIH is a discipline recognized for studying the intersection between aging and chronic disease. Let me highlight that. It is also the house of the country's first biology of aging PhD program, where I graduated from. And it's an incubator of many startups, including Unity Biotechnology, which is focused on diabetic macular edema, the loss of vision that occurs due to diabetes and macular degeneration in general. We're recognized by many news outlets. Highlighted here. We have a very high productivity with, oh, I'm so sorry, there's struggling here, and so much collaboration that occurs, highlighted here in green. We're very diverse. And we really have people from all over the world coming to study aging because we really attract people in this new field, the Institute being around only for about 20 or so years. This is the leadership at the Buck Institute. We have 22 labs studying all aspects from aging to specific diseases. Dr. Anderson over here, she's my boss, and her husband, Dr. Gordon Lithgow, is my other boss. And in the Anderson lab, we study Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, and in the Lithgow lab, we study aging in general. So what is aging? So in general, aging is a natural process. It's how an organism changes with time. But with time, there can be an accumulation of damage. You can imagine an organism that is very finely tuned, always checking up on itself, always cleaning itself. And you can imagine if you have a house, you move in, it's completely clean, and you start doing things in it and you accumulate dust. And you clean that dust and you keep doing that, but you get tired. And sometimes there's this one corner where you have all this accumulation of dust and with time. And so that can lead to a loss of regulation. That loss of regulation, when you just get tired from cleaning and cleaning and cleaning, things just accumulate and don't work as well, leading to loss of function. But what we do know is that aging is the #1 risk factor for chronic disease. And at the Buck, we believe that diseases should not be an inevitable part of growing old. And here we've highlighted a few. Here's what we study: type 2 diabetes, metabolic disorders, glaucoma, sarcopenia, heart attack, emphysema, osteoporosis. So again, these conditions arise with age, but haven't always been looked at in the context of age, which is what makes the Buck very unique in that regard. And there's also this idea of the difference between lifespan and health span. The lifespan is how long we live. Let's say this is an average lifespan that we see today, which is really wonderful. But there's also a health span. That's how long we are growing to be this age, but in a healthy state. And what we see right now is that there is a time, about 10 years or so, when we don't feel so good. But what we know is that centenarians have a much longer lifespan, and they have a much longer health span, so that the time that they are not feeling well is reduced quite a bit. And that's the goal of the Buck, to increase this health span, to increase the time that we all feel great and to reduce the time that we don't, so that we can be more productive and happy and living really a wonderful life. So all of these conditions that I mentioned before, they reduce the functionality quite a bit as we grow older. And by 2050, there's going to be more than 65 million adults. So we have an ever-increasing aging population. But the goal is to really push that and to increase function really into quite a bit into the lifespan. But usually how medicine has been generally studied is each disease is in its own silo. not a lot of interaction. But what really combines all of these conditions is aging. So we need to move away from attacking each individual disease to attacking it holistically. And that's why at the Buck, even though each lab has its own focus, it's all under the umbrella of aging. And there's a lot of collaboration between labs to try to understand common mechanisms. So we know that there are many things that can increase health span. Exercise is my favorite over here. I also like to sleep. Nutrition. And we know that we can run tests and we can take supplements and vaccines and all of this, and that can help improve our life. But we don't really know the intersection. We don't really know in which direction to go. And at the Buck, we have scientific-based proof. We observe, we question, hypothesize, experiment, and we come to very concrete answers to the question of aging and how all of these interventions that we know generally have over so many years. We know how exercise is good for, we know that exercise is good for us, but we don't know why it is good for us. So now I'll move on to talk a little bit about our focus. So I'm in the Anderson lab, and our focus is really on Parkinson's disease, therapeutics, also Alzheimer's disease. And like I mentioned, Dr. Lithgow studies aging in general, and he's interested in genes and small molecules that are related to helping increase lifespan and improve health span. So my focus is Parkinson's disease, and here I've put up a little bit of information about what it is. So today, Parkinson's I was just at a conference at the end of September, and really now it's characterized not as a disease so much as a syndrome. And what that means is that it affects many parts of the body. There are many different symptoms. We have an idea of what it looks like, but really everything is so interconnected. It's progressive, which means that it changes with time. It's neurodegenerative. It affects specifically the amount of dopamine, which is related to movement. It's age-related. The majority of cases occur in the mid-60s. It affects about 1% to 2% of the population, and now we even think that it could be a pandemic because it's increasing exponentially. And while it's not a infectious disease, but so many people are really, really getting it. And it's not genetic either, and it's more of an environmental disease, but there's this interaction between genes and the environment. And generally, we think of Parkinson's really as something from the outside, some way that we get Parkinson's because of something that we were exposed to. I know many of you may know about Parkinson's, but I want to run through some of the aspects. So there's the motor aspect, which is what we see and which is how it is clinically diagnosed. The underlying mechanism is the loss of dopamine in a part in the brain called the substantia nigra. It leads to dyskinesia, which means that we move too fast, or bradykinesia, which means we move too slow. So movement is not very well regulated, not very well controlled by the person who has Parkinson's. There's rigidity, issues with balance, altered gait, and stooped posture. That's a very visible way of determining that someone has Parkinson's. But there are also non-motor symptoms, and there are many, and I just listed the two that are most relevant to my interests at this moment, and that's the gastrointestinal aspect. For example, it's thought that Parkinson's may actually start maybe decades before someone is actually diagnosed in the clinic. And the reason why is because there's something developing actually in the GI. Issues with GERD, issues with bowel movement may signify that Parkinson's. It doesn't mean that they are, but there's this hypothesis that what is happening is that there's something occurring in the GI. And what that something may be is actually this protein alpha-synuclein, which we don't know so much about. We don't know completely what it does in the body. It's present in almost every cell type. And we know that it has a role in transferring information from neuron to neuron. And what's very important is that the GI actually has its own autonomous nervous system, the enteric nervous system. And alpha-synuclein may play a role that we don't quite understand in that nervous system. And mainly we think of the protein by itself having some sort of function, but then it is no longer as pliable. It is changed chemically, and it starts interacting with other proteins, and it forms these clumps. And those clumps can spread from cell to cell, and they can grow. And it's very interesting because generally we think of this as a way that Parkinson spreads. So it spreads from the gut to the brain because the gut cells have this alpha-synuclein that clumps. It spreads from gut cells to nervous cells to the gut-brain axis, which is called the vagus nerve, and then eventually into the brain. There's also another idea that it actually starts closer to the brain in the olfactory bulb, and the same protein may start to clump there and then spread to the rest of the brain. And there's actually differentiation between body first Parkinson's, which may start in the gut, and brain first Parkinson's that may start closer to the brain in the olfactory bulb. And those can be two different types of Parkinson's manifesting in different types of symptoms. For example, those people who have brain first Parkinson's may have more tremor. Those who have body first Parkinson's may actually have more rigidity. And there are other many different differentiations between the two. And this is really coming to light now. But what I do want to say, and this is something that interests me very much, is that even though this protein clumps, we don't really know what it does, but it's very possible that it's actually the body's protective response towards something. And that something may be some chemicals, some nasty bacteria. And what this protein does is that it latches on to those chemicals or nasty bacteria and it starts to clump and quarantine. And it kind of spreads because that's the way that that protein behaves. Maybe it's just protecting the body from these dangerous outside environmental aspects. And so I also highlighted anxiety here. And it's not only a symptom of Parkinson's, but the reason I want to highlight it is because anxiety is often very well connected to how the gut and the brain talk. Bacteria in the gut may produce chemicals that actually calm our nervous system and make us more likely to respond to stress in a positive way, where we get stressed out really quickly, but then relax. But anxiety is kind of chronic anxiety is something that can actually occur from chemicals that are produced by bacteria that actually affect our nervous system in a negative way, making our gut-brain axis, which controls our ability to regulate stress, less, not as strong, basically. So our approach, the way that we think about Parkinson's is that there's some sort of stress that may occur. It could be psychological or physical. It could be due to bacteria or chemicals, something that impacts the body in some way that causes it to no longer work the way it was working before. There's the neurological aspect, which is the brain, and then there's the gastrointestinal. And we're interested in knowing how all of these interconnect, whether the gastrointestinal influences our ability to cope with stress, whether it's the other way around, and how all of this can impact eventually and actually lead to Parkinson's specifically. And so I want to highlight the importance of the gut microbiome. This is a paper that just came out last year that reveals that there are differences between the Parkinson's gut microbiome and the non-Parkinson's gut microbiome. And the main findings in this paper is that those who have Parkinson's have different bacteria. They characterized what that bacteria is, and that the bacteria don't really speak to each other. And bacteria really in the gut, they produce certain chemicals that impact other bacteria. And for example, a bacteria like lactobacillus can be very protective. It can produce this chemical called lactic acid, which can actually kill bad bacteria. And that's how those bacteria interact with other bacteria. But some bacteria also feed other bacteria. And what they found is that in the Parkinson's gut, there's actually less interaction between different types of bacteria, and there's also bacteria that produce less of the chemicals that are important for a healthy gut-brain axis, and those are called short-chain fatty acids, and those can positively impact our nervous system, allowing us to be calm. And when that part of our nervous system doesn't act very well, then we have a dysregulation and a dysregulated response to stress. And what I also want to highlight is that at UCSF right now, there are quite a few clinical trials going on. This one is called Microbiota Intervention to Change the Response of Parkinson's Disease. And what it does is that it actually doses the participants with a low dose of antibiotics to potentially kill the bad bacteria that could be responsible for either Parkinson's or for the progression of Parkinson's or for the general well-being of someone who has Parkinson's. I also want to highlight the importance of exercise. So I haven't really mentioned this yet, but our focus is on exercise because like this paper shows, and this was very beautiful, this came out last year as well, that exercise is the best medicine that we have for Parkinson's. So the reason why I want to talk about exercise, and I've talked about stress, is because exercise is something that can actually help us regulate our stress. And it can also regulate our gut microbiota. So what this paper showed is that exercise generally is feasible, as I think many of you know, for those who have Parkinson's. It's protective against Parkinson's. It can reduce Parkinson's symptoms, and it can improve brain function. So it can actually help produce chemicals in the brain that can actually restructure the brain. And also there are 2 clinical trials at UCSF looking at the effect of exercise on cognitive ability of those who have Parkinson's, and actually a phase 3 study that I remember began when I was defending my PhD into the study of intense treadmill exercise and impacting on the reduction of progression and improvement, general well-being of those who have Parkinson's who were just diagnosed. And in this paper, what they highlighted is how people who are participating in exercise pretty much their entire life and do get diagnosed with Parkinson's, that time of diagnosis is actually pushed several years ahead. And these are people who regularly exercise. Then there are people who are diagnosed. The prodromal phase is the part of Parkinson's before clinical manifestations, before we can definitively say that someone has Parkinson's. But if they start to exercise after that point, their ability here in terms of dopaminergic neurons, in terms of non-motor symptoms like gastrointestinal dysfunction, and their motor symptoms and general quality of life is better if they exercise than if they do not. So it really is the best medicine that we have. But how does exercise affect the gut? How does it affect the gut microbiome? And this is a paper that came out that was really on this topic. It was from someone who studies physical therapy and who recommends that we don't just engage in certain exercises, but we engage in those that we study, those exercises that have the most significant effect actually on the gut microbiome. And so this is actually something that we would like to do. We would like to run clinical trials that really explore the effects of exercise and how it can change the gut microbiome. And so one way that we can do that is to access human data. We recently came across Fox Insight from the Michael J. Fox Foundation. This data is specific for Parkinson's. This initiative asked 119 questions about the well-being of those who have Parkinson's and controls, as well as their caregivers. It also collected gut microbiome samples in addition to oral microbiome samples. And we want to ask the question of how does physical activity benefit the gut microbiome? So our goal is to take all of this data, to take the gut microbiome data, and to see how people who exercise, do they have a different gut microbiome than those who don't, and are they healthier? And so this is some data that we've collected just from the information provided by people who say that they exercise and those who don't. And one of the main symptoms that many who have Parkinson's experience is constipation. And what we see is actually from this data that if people are involved in moderate activity, they have an improvement in their constipation. They actually have reduced constipation. What we see here is the number of people who were, who were, it's just one of those days, I know. It's because I pressed the wrong button. This is, you can see how many people are actually involved. This is a huge amount of people, greater than 55,000, and more people entering the studies every day. We characterized a group, those people who have Parkinson's and those who don't have Parkinson's, as controls. And then those who submitted gut microbiome samples, and ultimately their characterization of their stool type 2 being constipation, stool type 3 being regular bowel movement. And so what we already see is that exercise, a specific type of exercise, may actually impact and improve this symptom. And often that may mean that it has actually something to do with changes in the gut microbiome. So we want to access this human data, and we want to ask the question, can we treat Parkinson's by changing the PD gut microbiome to that of an exercising gut microbiome and thereby provide a therapy? And so this is the layout of our study. We have this Fox Insight data. We have information about people who exercised. We have their gut microbiome samples. And we want to ask, how does exercise affect the gut microbiome? And can we bring this knowledge into the lab? And can we eventually test this through clinical trials? So that's our goal, and that's what we're working on right now. So I'll move on to talking more about the Buck Institute and showing a few pictures about our wonderful community. We have these amazing seminars, some that are open to the public, some that are geared towards us understanding more about the research of our fellows. We have an excellent learning center for anybody really. We have high schoolers coming in, school-age children, anyone else from the community. They're brought to the Learning Center to understand what the Buck does. We have really wonderful facilities that allow us to do all of this amazing work, and of course, beautiful views. And this is also very important. We, at the start of last year, now have a clinical trials department. We have actually a study that was completed last year on ketone esters. Ketones are chemicals that provide energy for the body from when we metabolize fats. an alternative source of energy. And we have an actively recruiting clinical trial right now called STAC, looking at variations in ketone metabolism. Another one will be starting later this year in December or January. And we have a study about exercise as well, looking at the effects of exercise on aging. We also have a study looking at the effects on ovarian aging, sugar, stress, lowering supplements for women's hormones. And we also have something called the Big Biobank at the back, where we're just collecting blood to accelerate our understanding of aging research. So this is actually something very exciting and very important, because now we're able to take our ideas and actually bring them into the clinic and to start applying our understanding of aging at this point, which we've accumulated over 2 decades or so, and to actually bringing it out into potential treatments. You can also learn more about aging. We have a Buck Academy. It's a really wonderful course that talks about biology of aging. And I think I looked at it yesterday and I thought it was really, really lovely. We also have a podcast where really the cutting edge research that is done day to day. We have our scientists talk about their research and really what's going on in the lab right now. We also have community seminars. We had last year a community seminar from Dr. Melov on exercise, what outer space can teach us about aging. This is from Dr. Furman, who does a lot of the bioinformatics works, a lab that we'll be collaborating with to do our own data analysis. Dr. Gordon Lithgow, what worms can teach us about living better longer. I actually, working in his lab, I work with worms and I exercise the worms. So they're getting tired of me. That's why I'm moving on to humans. Maybe humans will enjoy it more. Of course, Dr. Julie Anderson on how close we are to real treatments for neurodegenerative diseases, and many more. Dr. Newman is actually a clinical researcher who's in charge of the clinical trials we have at the Buck Institute. And we have a few coming up, the science of longevity from our CEO, Dr. Verdin. We have a seminar on ovarian aging, and then the future of medicine by Dr. Lee Hood, who became recently involved at the Buck Institute, a lot about artificial intelligence, machine learning, data analysis. Very important, very pertinent work. You can also come on a tour at the Buck every Tuesday and Thursday. You just have to reserve a spot. There are tours that come through the Buck at 11 a.m. And we would love to see you. It's a really beautiful area, a really beautiful campus. And you can also keep up with the Buck through the Buck blog. And actually, I and another coworker were just interviewed about the gut-brain connection. So that's the most recent blog post. You can check it out on the site. It's called The Gut-Brain Connection, How Bugs in the Gut Impact Neurodegenerative Diseases. Yeah, I'm coming to the end of the presentation, but you know, if you feel so inclined to support our research or anyone else who does, we do depend a lot on these donations. I won't put a plug too much for this time. I stay away from that, but I do want to say that actually all of my research has come from people who've been interested in supporting research in Parkinson's and specifically exercise. And that's what has kept my research going. And I'm very, very thankful for that. And that's the end. And I'd love to take any of your questions.
Thanks, Dr. Minna. We're going to be passing the microphones, Lynn and I. If you would just wait for us to get to you, and we'll start up the question and answer period. Lynn, I have one over here that I'll start with.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask a little bit about the gut microbiome, because you said exercise can change it,
Yes.
but also antibiotics. Do antibiotics need to be given at the same time? Does exercise eliminate the need for antibiotics?
That is a wonderful question. So what antibiotics do is that they kill pretty much all the bacteria. And it's even recommended that when you're taking antibiotics to take them with probiotics to help replenish your gut with good bacteria, because bacteria is really important for your brain, for your immune system. It's very, very important. For example, there's been evidence that the reason why autism develops is because autistic children may have a different gut microbiome, and as a result, their brain develops differently. So I just wanted to say that these bacteria are very important. In terms of whether exercise can replace antibiotics, these are a little bit different, because what exercise does is that, most likely, because we don't quite know yet, but what it does is it changes the environment of the gastrointestinal system. Maybe it makes it more acidic. Maybe what happens is that there is a crosstalk, and you start exercising, and now your body and your bacteria understand that you need this. You need different bacteria to support it, like bacteria that produce lactic acid, which is an energy molecule. And so things change, but they're not wiped out. In terms of treating someone with antibiotics and then exercising them, I think that that could potentially be a very good idea, because you would be wiping out all of the nasty ones and then maybe treating someone with probiotics to help replenish the good bacteria, and then subjecting them to exercise to help regulate and influence the gut microbial population. So that's a really wonderful question. Thank you. Oh, sure. Yeah.
Hi,
Hello.
thank you so much for your
course.
presentation. It was wonderful.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Did you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
You meant I have two questions
sure.
actually. You mentioned you said specific types of exercise. Could you please let us know what that is? Number one.
So, oh, sure.
Go ahead.
Okay. There was a study about high intensity exercise, but I do want to say that all forms of exercise are actually beneficial, even stretching, Tai Chi, dancing, anything that gets your body moving, because at the end of the day, being sedentary is not good. But there is an indication that high intensity exercise, something that really makes you work very hard, is potentially the most beneficial, but those studies have been in those who were just diagnosed. And the difference there is that those who were just diagnosed don't rely on medication yet. They don't have a strong progression of Parkinson's. And so those studies are limited. So we can't answer that question for people who have progressed and who've had Parkinson's for 10 years. And that's why we want to be able to understand what exercise is and provide a therapy that can be in lieu of exercise. Was that me?
Wasn't me.
Oh, sorry.
So, the second,
Mhm.
when I go to the drugstore,
Yeah.
because I take, what do you call the pills that?
Probiotics.
Probiotics. Yeah,
Yes.
sorry.
Yeah.
Well, there are so many
Yes.
different ones out there, and how do you know what to pick? And some have 50 billion and some have
Yeah.
10 billion.
Yeah. Yeah. So the number of bacteria is a good indicator. I don't know the difference between 50 and 20. I take probiotics myself. I think that they're great. But the more bacteria, yes, the more diversity potentially that you have. So you would potentially want a supplement that has many different types of bacteria. There there's a company that I like to use myself called Jarrow. I personally, I'm not recommending it as medicine, but they do actually have a lot of information about their different probiotics. There is one, for example, that enhances bowel movement. And that actually is only one type of bacteria. So in terms of what I said before, that you want to keep your gut microbiome diverse, that probiotic only provides you with one, but it does help your gut have more motility. So I would say diversity and the quantity of bacteria, I'm not too sure I can say. I think that more is better, but I do not know the optimal amount. More about that, it should be different types of bacteria that are there.
Here?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Hi, doctor.
Hi. Hello.
I'm Christina. I have Parkinson's. I've had it since I was 49.
Okay.
I've had it over 15 years, and I didn't even go to the doctor for the first 3 because I was so paranoid that I was going to have some major brain disease. I had 2 young boys at the time and a husband, and I wasn't able to face it.
Yeah.
It's been the worst part of my life the last 5 years, just horrendous. I wake up saying I don't want to live anymore.
Okay.
But I do want to live. But I do have some questions. Specifically, I had ovarian cancer at age 30 at the birth of my second son. And I had to have my ovary removed, and then I had to subsequently have hysterectomy complete. I wonder if this ovarian aging, are you studying the possibility of people that have had hysterectomies, total hysterectomies? And because there are receptors in your abdomen, and like when I had to do my surgery, it was very long surgery. It was 6 hours. I had no chemo or anything necessary. I just had to get completely, at 30 years old, it was very devastating to my system.
Mm-hmm.
So the question too is, when you say you're doing ovarian aging research, what does that exactly mean?
Sure. So I don't do ovarian aging myself. At the Buck Institute, there's a lab that focuses specifically on ovarian aging, which is very important to consider as a condition that many people go through. So unfortunately, I can't provide a lot of information in that regard. But you did mention that your body did go through quite a bit of stress, and this seemed like it was predated to your Parkinson's diagnosis. And I think that your hypothesis is probably correct, that there are so many connections and that this could be connected, but I really cannot say definitively. And I would really recommend, checking out the Buck and the research there on ovarian aging. I think that we're leading the way in this type of research, actually. Yeah. Oh, okay.
Hi, good morning.
Hello.
Good morning. I have a couple of questions. The first one is coming basically from my caregiver. I'm an addict with sugar. And basically what she's been saying is that if you get sugar out of your diet, that's going to impact what goes through your gut. And my doctor's not really said anything about, well, he doesn't have an opinion one way or the other. I'm wondering if that's being considered. The second thing has to do with a recent thing that was passed by the FDA. It's a way of getting the carbidopa into your system by using like similar insulin pack. Are you aware of that?
An insulin?
Well, it looks like what you put on insulin, but it's a pack that you attach to your body, and they have like a regulating carbidopa that go into your system.
Okay.
And I don't know if that would be something you could talk on at this point.
So I don't know about that system in detail, but I think that what it probably bypasses is the issues that are related to the digestion of carbidopa, levodopa in the gut. And often what happens is that because of constipation, then you don't get the full benefit of the medication. And so people are looking at even gastrointestinal pumps with injection of carbidopa, levodopa directly into the gut. And I think that it could be a good way of bypassing, but I don't do research on that particular.
Hello.
Anyone at the Institute who would be able to recommend or such whether to use it? We don't do those types of medical studies. I think that if anything, UCSF or a hospital or a dedicated doctor, I would be happy to help you find information on it. We do more basic research, so we don't see patients ourselves. But you did have a question about sugar. So sugar is a tricky thing because from what I've heard, many who have Parkinson's crave sugar. And it could be because of candida. It could be because you need energy. Generally, sugar is not considered a very good thing, and it can cause inflammation, which is something you want to reduce, and it could be a cause of Parkinson's. Um, I don't have any recommendations myself, except that I feel that sometimes if you need something, you should take it, but generally it's not considered a good thing. I don't think that either way we can't say definitively because we haven't done studies on the effects of sugar specifically for Parkinson's.
You mentioned the environmental component of Parkinson's.
Yes.
Have you done any work with the VA on those of us exposed to Agent Orange?
With veterans, we haven't. But Dr. Anderson has pushed very strongly against paraquat, a chemical, a pesticide. I think that there's definitely so much interest in studying different chemical exposures. And it's a very important question to ask. And we use pesticides like paraquat and rotenone actually in our studies to induce Parkinson's mechanisms. That link seems to be solid, and we should be studying more chemicals and exposures for sure.
Hi.
Hello.
So one benefit of exercise is eliminating toxins by sweating. And I'm wondering if anyone has studied the benefits of sauna for sweating, because my MD recommends saunas 5 days a week. And I actually almost get there.
I don't know how you do it. I would pass out. But not for Parkinson's, but for Alzheimer's. There was a study from Finland showing that those who participate in saunas seem to be protected against Alzheimer's. But it's not necessarily before everybody heads out and just so it's not only the sweating component. That's a very good point. Not something that I've thought about so much myself, but it's actually the response that we have to acute heat. There are mechanisms called heat shock proteins that can help maybe take that protein called alpha-synuclein that clumps together and unclump them. So these mechanisms are increased when we are exposed to heat. That could be a potential, but it could be also the elimination of toxins, could have an effect on our gut too. Yeah, so that's as far as I know, but I think it is probably good.
Minna,
Yes.
who was Parkinson's?
Oh, hi. Sorry.
Who was Parkinson?
Who is Parkinson? So he was a doctor. He wrote a paper called The Shaking Palsy in the late 1800s. And he started observing this condition where people in their 50s started to not be able to move, start to move abnormally, and manifest kind of, I guess, the worst that we see of Parkinson's when it really progresses. But that was back then. That's why we think that it's a pandemic now, because it wasn't that common. Either it could be because we're living longer. It could be because we're exposed to so many things. I don't know if I should say this, but smoking protects against Parkinson's. It does other bad things, but we've started to smoke less. And it's not recommended to start smoking because we don't have any evidence that suggests that if you do start smoking that it'll protect you now from Parkinson's. But generally speaking, but the same thing goes for coffee. The same thing goes for a healthy Mediterranean diet. And the same thing goes for exercise. Like the graph that I showed, if you've been exercising your whole life, you have less of a chance of getting Parkinson's.
What about electrical shock to the brain? My neighbor had Parkinson's and she went to Stanford and had electrical shock.
Uh-huh. So I don't know. I don't know about that. I do know about deep brain stimulation a little bit, and that involves electrical stimulation of the brain. And I don't know too much about it, but what I did read a little while ago is that it interrupts the signaling, the signaling that causes Parkinson's. So it doesn't increase dopamine, but it reduces the signaling that leads to the behavior that we see in Parkinson's. So I don't know about electrical shock, but it could be along those lines.
As you were giving your talk, I thought you were talking to me. About 30 years ago, I started taking omeprazole because I had GERD.
Yeah.
And about 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with Parkinson's. Would you say I probably had it 30 years ago and it just manifested itself in the last 3 years?
Yeah. So if you even think about that, you started taking it 30 years ago and you only got Parkinson's now, how strong your body is, really, our bodies are very resilient, but things happen with age. The hypothesis now is that it very well could be that something started to go awry in the gut, led to GERD. Then you started taking medication for it. Right now, we do have a breakthrough that was funded by the Michael J. Fox Foundation for biomarkers for Parkinson's, and that's a very important line of research because we need to determine early on if someone is getting it back when they start to get GERD or back when they start to experience things. But it could be, it could be the way that your gut and your brain started talking to each other. But I think that I really, really think that there's so much that can be done through exercise. It has a very, What? Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Because what I didn't mention is that there have been studies in those who don't have Parkinson's and how the gut changes with exercise. We have an increase of lactobacillus. Our gut actually goes through a very strong physiological change when we exercise. You may notice sometimes if you get nervous that you get like butterflies in your stomach, you might need to go to the bathroom or something happens. What actually happens is that our flight fight is upregulated. So we have blood flowing through our body. And when we get nervous, what happens is that our flight fight is activated and all that blood rushes to the organs that are important for fighting or flighting, which means our muscles, our heart, our lungs, and away from the gut. And so when we exercise, the same thing happens. And the hypothesis is that if we subject ourselves to those types of stresses ever so often, we actually help our body become more resilient to stress and help the gut and the brain talk better. And maybe the gut bacteria have a role in that. Yes.
Yeah. There's some theories about going from like a hot tub or a sauna into something really, really cold.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you were doing anything with that.
Yeah. So I myself don't, and I have tried and I'm very scared of doing that. But that's exactly the kind of thing that is behind the hypothesis of why exercise is so good for you, that shock to your system. is something that strengthens the gut-brain axis, the vagus nerve, because when you're subjected to that kind of stress, your flight fight is increased, and then that gut-brain axis, that nerve needs to start working harder to calm your nervous system. And so if you do that ever so often, that can help increase your nervous system and increase that connection. So what's been seen in Parkinson's is that that nerve isn't as active in those who have Parkinson's, and it's thought that that protein alpha-synuclein is playing a role. And so things like that, going from hot to cold or exercising, it can help that nerve work harder. Yeah.
And our last question.
First comment on the last question is perhaps Oakmont should look into getting cold tubs at our free facilities to shock you after your hot tub. So my question is about the gut biome. Have you studied, for lack of the technical word, people taking poo pills to change their biome? Because I know that can happen literally within a matter of hours once you take them from a bad biome to a good biome and really change your health.
Yeah. So I believe that there are studies that's a fecal microbial transplant, FMT. I think that there is someone at UCS staff studying that, not in the context of Parkinson's, but in the context of depression. So there are studies about it. We do not study that, but the idea behind that is that exactly you take a more healthy gut microbiome and you supplant an unhealthy microbiome, and I guess the question would be whether that is more beneficial than taking probiotics or not. I think it's probably stronger, because with probiotics, there's probably a gradual introduction of good bacteria that help battle the bad bacteria. But with FMT, there would be a complete complete replacement, right? So that's my knowledge to that degree. It's not, I have to say that this gut brain, even though we hear about it all the time, I'm very excited to do our studies because this is relatively new. We still don't understand the gut very well. We don't really understand very well how it connects with the brain, but we have very nice evidence that it does. And I think that there's a lot of potential of altering the gut in such a way that we could fix things, maybe reduce progression, reduce symptoms, because I think that we really, the chemicals that are produced by the gut microbiome, clearing waste, all of these things are so vital, and we don't really focus on it so much. So that's kind of all I have to say, because I don't do studies myself with FMT. Yeah.
Dr. Minna, we want to thank you very much for coming out here. She might be here